I'm just really happy to welcome our 2022 keynote speaker, Carlos Ramirez-Rosa. Carlos has been a tireless advocate well before his current 2 terms on the Chicago City Council as an alderman. Carlos has fought for varied policy positions of the working class with special focuses on things such as immigration rights. And his recent work is as varied as it is important. As we heard from early on the electoral panel, fighting for housing justice, creating civilian oversight of police department, and many more initiatives that have really cemented him as one of our premier DSA candidates, one of our premier DSA electeds, and a fantastic ally of the working class. So without further ado, please welcome Carlos.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, y'all. It is such a great pleasure and such a great honor to address you all in what is now the 40th year of DSA. 40 years. It's really great to be speaking with you all at your winter conference, which for some reason is taking place in the spring. I guess that's a thing. But there is just so much history in this room with CTU. There's so much history in this city. And so that's why I'm so glad that you all are meeting in Chicago right now. This is a city that gave the world International Workers' Day. In the 1880s, immigrant workers who had crossed very great distances to pursue the American dream realized that they were kind of living in a nightmare, being exploited, being abused by the capitalists and the boss. And so they said, we want to take action to improve our working conditions, to improve our lives. We want to fulfill the American dream. And they launched a campaign for an 8-hour workday with no cut in pay. 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours to do whatever the heck they wanted to do. And there was a man and a woman in the community that I represent, Avondale, Albert Parsons and Lucy Parsons, who were socialists and anarchists and leftist organizers, who led the first May Day march down Michigan Avenue downtown. Have you all been to Michigan Avenue? Have you all seen it? Very, very moneyed place, right? They led 80,000 workers on May 1st, 1886, the first May Day march for workers' rights, right down Michigan Avenue, demanding 8 hours with no cut in pay. And unfortunately, a few days later, at a rally, there was a police riot. Workers died, police officers died, and Albert Parsons, alongside other anarchists and leftists, was hung, wrongfully convicted for that police riot. Ultimately, he would be exonerated after his death. But it was that movement for an 8-hour workday that was heard across the world. It was that movement for an 8-hour workday that socialists and leftists across the world recognized as a spark, as something that inspired them to say that from now on, forever, May 1st would be known as International Workers' Day. It started right here in Chicago. And so that's why I'm happy that you all are here in this city. Because that movement, you are that movement today. All across this world, workers are waking up. All across this world and this country, workers are seizing their power. In 2010, I was a Union Summer for Jobs intern with the AFL-CIO, and I was a junior going into my senior year, so it was summer of my junior year. And at that point in time, I was interning with the AFL-CIO, and they told us that basically no one was in a union anymore, right? Like 3% of the private sector was unionized. And if you had told me at that point in time that Amazon would just win its first union, that Amazon workers, I would not have believed you. I would have said, what a dream. I would have said, how do we get there? If you had told me that workers, some of the most exploited, some of the most abused workers We're going to come together and take on the biggest corporation in the world and win. I would have said, how do we get there? If you had told me that 10 Starbucks locations across the nation would be unionized, I would say, how do we get there? And the truth is that the workers that have winning their union, they got there the good old-fashioned way. The same way that Albert and Lucy Parsons got there with the 80,000 workers marching down the street for an 8-hour workday. By organizing, by talking to each other, by coming together. And so that's why I'm so happy to be with you all here today, because that's exactly what you all are doing. You're organizing, you're coming together. I met some comrades from California who are doing amazing work in their chapter, fighting for housing, fighting against police brutality on their college campuses. And it is just so, so, so inspiring. You all inspire me so much. So, yeah, I guess, what do I want to tell you all? There's so much that I could tell you all. But I think that in this moment, we know that there are so many things that we are up against, right? There's the existential threat of climate change, right, as we live through a mass extinction. There's the growing fear of fascism in the United States as we have a right wing. There's a lot wrong right now. There's a lot of people experiencing homelessness. Homelessness is on the rise. But in response to all of those threats, climate change, poverty, police violence, we know that what we need is a movement. We know that what we need is working people from all across the world to come together and to fight for what is right. So I want to thank you all for fighting for what is right. I guess I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised in Chicago, and I was 25 years old, and I was unhappy with the direction that the city of Chicago was headed in. We had a mayor who was like a super duper neoliberal. Like, he was just really focused on closing schools and firing city workers and closing city departments. He closed half of our city's public mental health clinics. And guess what we saw? We saw the number of people in mental health crisis at Cook County Jail increase exponentially. He closed 50 schools. And what did we see? We saw violence with young people shooting each other in our streets. And so I was really unhappy. And in my own local community, what I saw was an alderman who was using his power over zoning and land use to sell out our community to the highest bidder, to developers that gave him big campaign contributions. And in return, they got whatever they wanted, even if it wasn't in the best interests of our neighborhoods. And so I was 25 years old, and I was approached by a comrade who said, we're really inspired by Kshama Sawant's victory in Seattle, and we want to run someone as an open socialist in the city of Chicago. And they said, we know a lot of theory, but we don't know much about knocking doors and campaigning. We know that you have spent a lot of time working on Democratic campaigns. Because remember those college Democrats I was talking about before? I used to be one. So they go, we know that you spent a lot of time, knocking doors and working on campaigns, so will you come help us? So we formed the Chicago Socialist Campaign, and there was about 50 socialists from all different types of socialist organizations that came together, and we started talking about what would it mean to run an open socialist for aldermen in the city of Chicago. And I was in charge of the campaign strategy committee, and we made a presentation. And we were at Hall House. I don't know if you all are familiar with Hall House at UIC. And there was 100 socialists in this room. And I put up a PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint is all right, this is the timeline. These are the legal requirements. This is the number of signatures we would need to collect. This is the amount of money that we would want to raise per quarter. This is how we would want to run a field program. And so this was the campaign strategy that our committee had come up with, and I'm presenting it. And I'm done making the presentation, and this older socialist woman stands up, and she goes, "What is this? This is a corporate presentation. This is not how you inspire the people." And I was like, oh, shit, fuck. And she was upset, right? Because we were not necessarily, saying the things that she wanted to hear, right? We weren't running the meeting like a rally. I thought this was a meeting that we were actually going to talk about, our strategy and move and coalesce these 100 people in this room towards activating that strategy, right? Shortly thereafter, there were some folks who denounced me and said that I was not socialist enough to be involved in this effort. And then there were other groups, other people in that Chicago Socialist campaign effort who were like, actually, Carlos, we think that you should be the socialist candidate. So eventually there were people in my neighborhood who were like, look, Carlos, and they were part of this socialist campaign effort. They're like, look, there are people that are in this Chicago Socialist campaign effort that are going to want to talk a lot about theory. They're going to want to yell at you and tell you that the way that you're saying things or doing things is not correct. But when push comes to shove, they're not going to knock doors. They're not going to do the work to get you elected. And so they said, why don't you just take a step back from the Chicago Socialist campaign and we'll build a community-centered, community-based campaign in the 35th Ward. And so that's the decision that we made. I made an announcement because there were people that were pushing and agitating for me to be the socialist candidate, and then there were folks that were pushing for another person to be the socialist candidate. And I said, you all, I'm going to bow out of this process. And so I went back to my community and we formulated a campaign. And one of the things that we said, number one, about that campaign was that it was going to be an organizing project, right? That the campaign itself was going to bring people from the community together to talk about the things that we needed to survive and to thrive. Number two, that once we won, the campaign would not stop. That every single person that we met in our community who wanted to be part of this project, that we were going to build an organization with them in our community that I would be accountable to, right? That would provide me with the place to strategize and to figure out how we were going to continue to work together to push our community's agenda. And then number three, we basically said that our campaign was about shifting the balance of power, right, at City Hall, because we understood that corporations and the rich had way too much power in Chicago City Hall, and that our communities were getting the short end of the stick, right? That we had a system at City Hall that was prioritizing profit and corporate greed before the people and the needs of our community. So we started knocking a lot of doors, and we started telling people that that's basically why I was running, right? We're like, Carlos is running to put the needs of, working families in our neighborhood first, and to take on the big and powerful special interests that are too powerful at City Hall. And guess what? We won with 67% of the vote against a 12-year incumbent. And then Bernie Sanders comes to Chicago. And this was his first campaign rally in Chicago. And it was so haphazard because the campaign was just starting. And this was before all of the $27 came in. So I said, I'm going to stand with Bernie. Right, I'm going to stand with him. This was actually in 2015, July of 2015. So I had been elected February of 2015, and then I had taken office in May of 2015, and now it's July 2015. And Bernie Sanders is coming to Chicago. And I got to speak. I got to introduce Bernie. I was 26 years old, and I'm on this podium, and I'm introducing Bernie. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. But it was at that moment when I saw Bernie Sanders running nationally as a Democratic Socialist that I said, all right, I got to let people know I'm a socialist. And so I came out at that point in time as a Democratic Socialist and said, look, I'm going to engage with the Democratic Party, but not as a corporate Democrat. I'm going to be in the halls of power at City Hall, but not as a corporate Democrat, but as a Democratic Socialist that's organizing and fighting alongside the people. And what has that meant? What has that meant in our community? What it has meant is that a lot of times I cast no votes against the corporate agenda that's being put forward by our neoliberal mayor. But more than anything, it means that we are constantly organizing in our neighborhood. I spoke earlier a little bit about the affordable housing fight, but basically that's one of the biggest needs, as I'm sure is one of the biggest needs in your community as well. Right? We have such a big need for housing in our cities and in our towns. For affordable housing, for dignified housing. And so we recognized that there was a city-owned parking lot right next to a train stop in my community that I represent, Logan Square. And we realized that it also sat in something called a TIF district, which basically means that there's dollars that come from property taxes that can only be spent there. Most of the time, guess where aldermen and the mayor allocate TIF dollars to? Just guess. Who do they give it to? Private pockets, developers, big corporations. There was actually one study that was done out of DePaul University that found that on average, if you gave an alderman a $5,000 contribution, you would probably get TIF money. Wow. So we said that money needs to go not towards corporations, not towards private pockets, but towards our community's need. And so we started a campaign to agitate and to organize to say that that parking lot needed to be turned into 100% affordable housing. And I remember I went into a meeting with the Department of Planning and Development, and I heard that they were going to issue basically a proposal to develop that as a, for-profit private development. And so I went to a meeting that the Department of Planning and Development hosted, and it was just me. And again, I'm like 26 years old, and I walk into this meeting, and they're like, we think we can get 30% affordable in this development. And I was like, no, it needs to be 100% affordable. Like, that's what the community is demanding. That's what we organized. That's what we collectively decided together. And they go, well, Alderman, how are you going to accomplish that? And I go, well, it's city-owned land, and it sits in a TIF district, and the city also has other CHA funds from our housing authority, right, that we can use. Through that, situation, we can get 100% affordability at this site. And they said, Alderman, they said, I remember this, I'll never forget it, this one city staffer, she grabbed her head like this, and she was like, ah. Like, she was just so incensed, right, that I would demand, right, and that my community would demand that this needed to go affordable housing. And she goes, Alderman, she goes, the city of Chicago needs money. We need to sell that lot to the highest bidder, and then we need to get that property onto the tax roll so that they can start paying taxes and so that we can make money as a city. And I said, look, that is a legitimate public policy concern. But a legitimate public policy concern is also the need for housing in my community. And we have the ability to meet that need with the funds that we have and with the land that we have. And so we left that meeting at an impasse. Basically, the Department of Planning and Development was like, we're not going to support what you and your community want. And I was not going to go along with what they wanted to impose on my community. And so the Department of Planning and Development, the head of it, then sent a very rich person to come meet with me, like one of the biggest developers in the city of Chicago, to basically try and convince me that I should support what they were trying to do there, because he wanted to buy that piece of land and he wanted to turn it into, luxury housing. And, I assumed that maybe other elected officials, right, would have met with this guy and said, you know what, let me just take his campaign cash, let me become his really, good buddy, and it will be my self-interest. But because we had a movement in our ward, because I'm a socialist, right, and I'm going to stand with my community and with working people, we told that developer to fuck off and to leave the office. And we organized. We organized, and we started by knocking doors, and we ran it just like we would run an election, right? We had a script. We went to people's doors, and we said, how do you feel about housing? How do you feel about affordable housing? How do you feel about, our community? Would you support this parking lot becoming 100% affordable housing, right? And if they didn't, if they were undecided, we would try and persuade them, right? We would talk to them why that was so important. If they were with us, we'd say, great, can you sign this commitment card? That when the time comes, if you have to go to a rally or if you have to go to a meeting, that you will turn out and that you will join us to support this 100% affordable housing. And while my community and I were out knocking doors in the streets, I was using my power as an elected official in the halls of power, right, to push. So I would meet with different city bureaucrats. I would send letters, right? I was relentless, right? I wasn't just going to take no for an answer, right? So it was that 1-2 punch. Right? It was an inside-outside strategy, right? It was me as an extension of the movement that was out in our community. And after 4 years, it took us 4 years, but man, was it worth it, we're cutting the ribbon on that building on May 20th of this year, and 100 families are going to move into that building. So that's just a very, very, very small example of how we should engage in electoral politics. And I know that we need so many more units, right? 100 is not enough. We need so many more units for our families. But I know that I have a base of people that I'm moving with, right? And let me tell you, the base of people that I move with, people in my office, they have Marxist reading groups. I don't have to, unfortunately, I wish I had the time to do it, but they are amazing. They're engaging in Marxist reading groups. They are all leaders in their own right, in different organizations, in different places. That's what we as socialists have to do, right? We have to organize. We got to do the good old-fashioned work, the work that Albert Parsons did, the work that Lucy Parsons did, the work that the Amazon Labor Union organizers did. We got to talk to people. We got to meet people where they're at. And if we do that work, if we build those coalitions, if we bring people together, we are going to fundamentally be able to transform this world from the bottom up. I feel a lot of hope right now, despite all of those other scary things that I listed off before, climate change and poverty and homelessness and police violence and, oh my gosh, the fascists that like are relentless and won't stop. I have a lot of hope right now because I got to spend 8 days in Chile a couple months ago with local elected officials. I met Daniel Jadwe, who was like the Bernie Sanders of like their campaign. He ended up losing to Gabriel Boric. And it's so funny because, you know, if you all are familiar with Gabriel Boric, the new president of Chile, he's a socialist, and we all love him. I met with activists in Chile who were like, yeah, Gabriel Boric is like Biden. We know, in fact, he's not like Biden, right? He's not, like to the right, the way that Biden is. But he's not as, radical as Daniel Jadwe. But I met with Daniel Jadwe, and he told me that it took them 12 years as the Communist Party in Recoleta in Santiago, it's the area where he became mayor, it took them 12 years to be elected. So they came up with a strategy where they said, okay, the first race, we as the Communist Party in this town in Santiago, Chile, so think of it like a borough, right? So like, you know how New York has different boroughs? So it's Santiago, right? It's the metro area, but it's this one borough called Recoleta. And so it's one of the most working class, working poor areas of Santiago. And after the end of the right-wing dictatorship and the reintroduction of democracy, basically a local right-wing party just got a ton of money and they established themselves in this working class community. And they had been in power there. They were like a little local machine in that area in Chile. And they, so they basically, this right-wing party controlled this area. And so the Communist Party Recoleta said, we are going to become the city government in 12 years. The first 4 years, we want to get 10% of the vote. The second race, 8 years later, we're going to get 20% of the vote. And then they plan to win with 40% of the vote. They felt like that's what they needed in order to win the election 12 years later. And that's exactly what they did. They built a base. They started building by talking to people and figuring out what were the needs that they had. And now he's been reelected with like 60-something% of the vote, and they control the entire city council. So that's like a long-term strategic plan that they had to implement, but they did it. And that's what gives me hope, because there's no reason we can't do the same exact thing in the United States. See, Chicago gave the world International Workers' Day, but it also gave the world Milton Friedman and neoliberalism. And if you all know anything, the policies that they've tried to implement here in the United States, like privatization and charter schools and, cutbacks and fighting against the union and austerity, that was implemented in Chile on steroids when Pinochet took control, right? Pinochet becomes the dictator, right? They kill Salvador Allende in 1973. 6 months later, Milton Friedman, right, one of the Chicago boys, right, from the University of Chicago, goes to Chile to begin telling the dictatorship, these are the policies, these are the neoliberal policies that you need to put in place, right? They give all power to the private sector and take away power, right? And this dictatorship wasn't just violent in September of 1973 when they toppled Salvador Allende. It was decades of violence. It was decades of torture. It was decades of kidnapping people, disappearing people, systematically oppressing the left. And after the fall of the dictatorship in the early 90s, the Chilean left gets to work. And let me just make it clear, they were always working, right, throughout the entire dictatorship. They were organizing, right? They were very courageous people who were facing death, that were facing right-wing violence and continued to organize. But after the fall of the dictatorship and the reinstitution of democracy, the Chilean left got to work, and today they have a socialist president, and socialists and leftists are rewriting the Constitution. So If the people of Bolivia can do it, if the people of Chile can do it, surely we can do it too. And that is why I am so hopeful in this room right now. See, Pablo Neruda, the famous Chilean writer, he said, you can cut down all the flowers, but you can't stop the spring. And that's what Pinochet tried to do. He tried to cut down all the flowers. And all he did, all that right-wing dictatorship did, was it spread the seed everywhere. And now the spring is here. So that's why I'm so grateful and I'm so honored to be able to be with you here today, because you are our spring. In this room is the spring of the American left. How old are you all? You're what, 20, 21? Maybe there's some folks who are 22. You all are babies. You might not realize it, but you all are babies. And I know that here there are leaders. I spoke with leaders here tonight, this afternoon, who told me that they're organizing at Starbucks, who told me that they're organizing in their communities. I know that there is so much power in this room. You all are going to do amazing things. And sometimes it's only going to be winning 100 affordable housing units, right? Sometimes it's only going to be making sure that in the city of Chicago, right, police cannot work with ICE in no case, no exception, which was another long-term campaign that socialist elected officials in the community fought for and won. But all of those little victories, the unions that you all will organize in your workplace, the people that you will touch and bring into this movement, all of those little victories are going to spread more seed, are going to water the earth, and are going to lead to the spring. So I want to say thank you in advance for all of the work that you all are going to do. I want to say thank you for all of the work that you've already done and that you're doing right now. We have a world to win. The odds are against us. Our enemy is powerful. But we have seen people all across the world in more dire situations change their world, change their reality, bring people together. Do we have a world to win, y'all? Do we have a world to win, y'all? Then let's go out and win it. I want to thank you all so much. Solidarity forever.
Let's give it up. Let's give it up for Alderman Carlos. True hero of the working class. All right. So we are getting ready to start our workshops. Many of you will get a chance to leave this awesome hall that we've been in for the past few days.